Mini-episode 1753 of the FDH Lounge is brought to you by Sportsology, delivering unconventional columns and webcasts about sports, TV, music, movies, and more. Follow them on the web at sportsology.com.
The FDH Lounge. You'll want to schedule your life around it.
A long time ago, on a gloomy, wet Cleveland spring night, two men stand alone amidst the late-night drizzle. Their voices echo across the vacant station parking lot as they debate the merits of the great American radio show that have been missing for far too long. On that night, an idea was born. That idea became the FDH Lounge. Welcome to the FDH Lounge.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to the FDH Lounge. This is FDH Managing Partner Rick Morris coming at you today with my fellow FDH Lounge original dignitary Chris Galloway. We are taking our annual tour of the NFL divisions, and today we are here previewing the 2024 NFC East. And as I say at the top of all of these ones here, I will refer you back if you're looking for some macro-level notes for the season, and there aren't many because it was not a hugely tumultuous off-season. But go back and check out mini episode 1748 in the first part of that one, and you will get to hear our macro-level thoughts. For everything else that we're doing here in these segments, the foundation of it is able to be found in Fantasy Football Draftology 2024, available on the main page at fantasydrafthelp.com. Go check it out, pages 17 and 18, one run-on sentence for each team. Page 18 is the NFC, which we are now up to, and the NFC East, which we are doing today. And just like thematically for any of these divisions, Chris, this is, to me, the least likely one to follow the whole biblical thing here of like, the last shall be first and the first shall be last. You ain't going to see that in this division.
No, but I think you're going to see a little bit of shuffling. I do think we're going to see a different winner in this division than what we saw last year.
Well, there's only two possible winners here, so I do agree with you on that one. And I think there's going to be some bunching up, too. And I think that what I have to say in particular about Dallas may raise some eyebrows, potentially Washington as well. But here's what I've got for each of the teams. These are my picks in order. Philadelphia. The shocking and inexplicable collapse down the stretch in 2023 lingers as an issue that must be addressed, and the offensive line is more questionable than the Eagles are used to seeing, but Howie Roseman plugged a number of vacancies on both sides of the ball in an aggressive offseason and had his usual luck with stud players falling in the draft. Dallas. Here's my clip and save. While coaching has been a hot seat issue for the better part of the last decade and a half, the stealth issue holding back the team has been the Stars and Scrubs approach to franchise building, and after a disastrous offseason, the balance between Stars and Scrubs is truly precarious, meaning that even in a shallow NFC, the Cowboys won't even be in a position to repeat their annual tradition of disappointing their fans in the playoffs, and that's not even taking into account the degree to which contract issues could poison the clubhouse. Washington. If Jaden Daniels is legit, then this team is poised to make noise sooner rather than later, since the post-Daniel Snyder front office rebuilt the roster aggressively in the offseason. New York Giants, the stench of Danny Dimes, as well as a bad offensive line and the loss of Saquon Barkley, marks this team as the early favorite for the first pick in the 2025 NFL Draft. So, all right, Chris, with those four teams right there, make of that what you will.
Well, I'm going to go with the Eagles to win 11 games and turn around their late season slide last year. I thought Howie Roseman did an admirable job in the draft and in free agency, picking up some really good pieces. Obviously, I'm a big fan of Quinyon Mitchell and even Cooper DeJean. I think those are they were in desperate need of back of the defense guys, and I think those are both guys that are going to play a long time. So I think they've done a nice job on sort of turning it around and putting themselves on a trajectory where they can be successful this year. I do think that there is still some questions after last year on Jalen Hurts on whether or not he's going to be the guy in the way that they're paying him. That being said, the rest of that division, in my opinion, is not very good. And so, therefore, the Eagles will win it. In second place, I've got the Cowboys. I've got the Cowboys with 9 wins and probably looking out on the outside, looking in as it relates to the playoffs. So I have them at 9 and 8. I think they're going to have some defensive struggles in a few spots. This team seems a bit disjointed in terms of not only the coaching but how they're treating Dak Prescott. And they don't believe in him or not. CeeDee Lamb wants a new contract. Jera's not giving it to him. I just think this team just smells like a team that's going to underperform, kind of wash out, and leave their fans disappointed. Third place, I'm going to pick the Washington Commanders to finish 8 and 9. They'll be surprisingly a little bit better than people think they're going to be. And I as you know from the draft, I'm not a Jalen Daniels fan in terms of that draft pick, but I do think there's talent on that roster. And I do think that they're going to squeeze enough out. And then in the rear, I've got the Giants at 7 wins, going 7 and 10. I don't believe in that roster at all. And after that first year of coaching magic, they're fading, and they're fading hard. That is not a good roster. And so I think the Giants are going to struggle.
Nevertheless, Chris, I'm struck by the fact that has to be the nicest thing that anyone has ever said. He said sarcastically about a 7-win team here. I mean, what the way you're describing them and these 7 wins doesn't exactly go hand in hand.
I mean, it's the NFL. They're paid professionals.
Okay.
They're going to win games, right?
Okay.
They're not completely devoid of talent.
Yeah.
They've got some great defensive pieces,
Mm-hmm.
right? They've got a left tackle, and then the rest of that line is like, They lost, they lost Saquon Barkley. Daniel Jones is not the guy. And if you're a Giants fan, or what are you hanging your hat on that roster? There's some C-level, B-level pieces there, and you're going to win, 6 to 7 games. I'm giving them the high side, right, of saying 7, just because I think that they'll probably split with all 3 of those division guys.
Okay.
Or come damn close to it. So I just, it's just not a roster you can believe in when you look up and down it.
No, it's not. The funny thing is, I've got Washington for 7 wins, but I feel a lot better about them than that. You've actually got them for 8, so surprisingly you overshot me on that, and I say surprisingly in the sense that I don't think there's a lot of people out there that look at them the way that we do, 7 or 8 wins, but I think you and I are seeing the same things about the way that they're putting things back together there. And again, the most important piece of the puzzle obviously is going to be quarterback and what happens with Daniels there, but what I'm struck by, I'm not necessarily making a comparison, but everybody looks at C.J. Stroud getting to Houston and the progression that they've been able to take, and has that been the most important piece of the puzzle? Yes. But over the last 2 years, they've really been rebuilding the roster top to bottom, and it feels like Washington is at the outset of doing something like that. So in that sense, I will make a comparison to Houston, even if we don't know if the quarterbacks compare.
No, I agree about that. I mean, look, Bobby Wagner's a pro. They brought in some decent, shrewd little, guys like that, and so they've added some talent. Again, I'm not a believer in Jalen Daniels. He's got a lot to prove, in my opinion, in terms of making the step up to the NFL. But I think they're doing it the right way, actually, for the first time in a long time. And I think Vegas has got their win total at 6.5. So I'm erring on just north of there, right, with 7 wins. 8 wins. I'm a little bit of a believer. Their schedule's not too bad. So I'm gonna say that this is a team that surprises. Unlike the Giants, which I think Vegas is probably at 6 wins or so, maybe 5.5. I can't remember. But they've got great defensive pieces, right? I mean, yeah. Kayvon Thibodeau, Dexter Lawrence. They brought in Brian Burns, But on the offensive side of the ball, I'm going, well, how are they scoring more than 10 points a game?
Well, Yeah, good question. I will tell you that lifelong New York Giants honk and FDH Lounge dignitary Steve Callis was despondent about the inability to upgrade a quarterback in the draft. I did say to him, like, look, you're a year away because you're going to be bad enough to get one next year. And in the meantime, you've got Neighbors, who's going to be a stud wide receiver when he does get the quarterback out there. So, I mean, they're halfway there to having the deadly combo at quarterback and wide receiver, and in all likelihood, they're going to be horrible enough in 2024 to be able to get there next year. Shades of what I said about Vegas previously.
Yeah, they're going to have a top 10 pick. They're going to have an opportunity to move up. And yes, you know, I was higher on Neighbors than any other wide receiver in this draft. I think he's going to be sneaky good. But that may not manifest itself until they have the right quarterback.
Yeah.
So again, the Giants are, you know, in my mind, they're pulling up the rear at 7 and 10, but there's pieces there, right? You know, same thing with Washington, you know, with maybe 8 wins this year. There's pieces there. You can see it kind of coming together. And then right in front of them, you have the Cowboys, who look like they are positioned to implode next year, like straight out implode. Yep. They won't implode this year, but I look at that roster and I look at who's getting contracts, not getting contracts, where the talent is, you know. I'm like, I think the Cowboys might implode next year in 25. So, you know, don't be shocked if next year when we get through the off season that we might be looking at, you know, depending on what they do at quarterback and how does Jalen Daniels look for the Commanders. You know, we might be looking at Dallas at the rear of that division next year.
It's entirely possible, yeah. I mean, that situation there, and I will just say too that in between, not to pull back the curtain here too much, but there was a slight gap between as far as the day or two when you and I recorded the AFC and the NFC previews, and in the interim, I happened to catch again our fellow OU alum, Dan McDowell, on his great sports and comedy podcast out of Dallas, The Dumb Zone. Those guys were talking Cowboys. They made a point that was very, very salient looking at that roster, and that everything you said about what the Browns are doing about spending to 120% of the cap or whatever, Jerry Jones always finds a way not to do that. And that's an intricacy they got into that I hadn't noticed. But it's always a thing of like, well, we're setting money aside to do this, and then they always find themselves in the worst negotiating posture that they could be in because they haven't locked up their key pieces. They're all going to be coming due here, and they're going to pay probably some but not all and watch some of them walk away, and it's just going to perpetuate the whole stars and scrubs system that they've got there. And I look at that roster, and I realize that I'm something of an outlier, but I see more holes looking at that roster, I think, than most people do right now. And they're always a stars and scrubs team. So what does that tell you?
They've been stars and scrubs since Jimmy Johnson left. That's for sure.
Yes.
That has been the nature of that team. And I agree with that, and it's a great phrase. I don't know that I'd ever heard that before. But I agree with it spot on. That is, you know, the depth isn't there. They have some guys past their prime that they have a name. You know, they go and they bring in a name. And, you know, clearly they are starting to alienate their quarterback and their number one wide receiver. So that's not a good model. I think Dallas has been mentally soft for years. And I think that's why they implode in the postseason year after year after year. And it doesn't seem to matter the coaching or the system. You know, you bring in a guy like Dan Quinn, it doesn't matter. It just seems to be soft mentally.
They are, yeah.
And I don't know how you change that, right? Because, like, you see that differently in, you know, the division we're going to talk about next in terms of Detroit. You know, and the reason that, you know, that I was a huge advocate for them, you know, hiring the coach that they did, as you remember, was that I knew that franchise would get tougher.
Yeah.
And Dallas is just soft. And so that ultimately ends up translating. And that's my beef with the Browns, right? Last year, you remember me bemoaning the fact that I felt like we had too many betas on the Browns roster.
Right.
And that might be a generational thing, right? Like where it's just this sort of Gen Z, this Alpha Gen Alpha, whatever the hell they're calling themselves now.
Yeah.
There just seem to be a lot of guys who don't want to sort of take that A leadership role. And I see that's very similar to the way the Cowboys are constructed.
Well, I'm sure all the Zoomers out there are listening to this going, okay, Boomer, but I do co-sign with you on the generational thing here as well, like the good Xer that I am. And I will say, in looking at this, in terms of the whole thing of like signing names, that's a thing where you talked about the comparison to Cleveland football. I'll make the comparison to Cleveland baseball. The very cynical year in and year out thing. I was like 2 years ago. Hey guys, we just signed Noah Syndergaard. How stupid do you think people are? Okay, like the guy's name might still be Noah Syndergaard, but that's not Noah Syndergaard. So what Dallas did with bringing back Ezekiel Elliott. Hey guys, we got one of the best running backs of the last decade in Ezekiel Elliott. Well, that's still his name, but that's not still Ezekiel Elliott.
It wasn't Ezekiel Elliott in his last year with Dallas.
No.
And so he sure as hell he's more like, he's not Ezekiel Elliott, he's more like E.E. Cummings at this point, small, he's lowercase double E.
I love that point of comparison, and it takes me back to when I said that Peyton Manning won 2 Super Bowls, but one is Peyton Manning and one is Trent Dilfer. And, there comes a point in time where it's like, guys should almost be legally forced to change their name because that's not them anymore. And Zeke, particularly behind an offensive line that, oh, by the way, ain't what it used to be. Again, I was a proponent when they drafted him, and some people weren't. And I don't remember, there was an NFL player on the show that I was kind of debating about. I think it might have been N.D. Kalu, and he was like, well, Darren McFadden got 1,000 yards behind that line. I'm like, yeah, but Zeke might get 2,000 yards behind that line. Like the notion of doubling down on an area of strength. If you have an elite offensive line, go get an elite running back, and it worked for as long as it worked. But he ain't what it used to be. The line ain't what it used to be, and that's a bad combo, Chris.
Oh, spot on. That's exactly right. And especially when you talk about that line, it's not what it used to be.
No.
And that's a similar thing to my analysis of the Browns this year. I am very worried about that line.
Yeah.
And so, that's why Dallas will fade. Mm-hmm. They'll finish 9-8, and they're going to miss the playoffs.
I've got them at 8-9, and it's so funny that it's only a game difference between us. But it's like if it's 9-8, that would be something of a disturbance in the force as far as the football world goes. But it seems like if it's 8-9, if they don't even make 500, then that's going to be a thing where, again, ESPN will be 24/7 on that. Like they're not already with the Cowboys. So, that's going to be something to keep an eye on. So it's so funny that, like, for the perception of this division and the perception that Philly and Dallas are neck and neck, at the end of the day, it feels like you and I are saying that it's not exactly Philly by default, but it kind of is. I mean, if Dallas isn't going to be strong enough to push them, certainly the other two teams are not there yet. This is closer to Philly by default than anybody really thinks, I think.
I think that's a good analysis because Philly is still they're not a perfect team.
No.
They have some problems there, but like I said, I think overall the division is very meh. So that is why they will roll through and people will end up at some point going, oh, hey, look how great, look how the Eagles are back,
Right.
But I'm not sure at this point that I'm going to believe in them come the playoffs.
Well, the bottom line, it sounds like from our perspective, is to quote the great AEW star MJF, the NFC East is mid. And that's basically how Philly comes out of it here at this point. So, again, thank you so much for your analysis on this, Chris Galloway, and thank you all for joining us for our breakdown of the 2024 NFC East.